Houshin Project begins by showing the atmosphere in the Sennin world, or the realm of deities, precisely at Kunlun Mountain. There, a young man named Taikobo is meeting his master, Genshi Tenson, who is also the ruler of Kunlun Mountain. Because Taikobo is one of his most talented students, Genshi Tenson asked him to do an important task while submitting the Houshin list. It contains a list of names of the Sennin who often commit crimes in the human world, where it is led by a powerful female Sennin named Dakki. In his task, Taikobo is required to capture the evil Sennin consisting of more than 300 people and then seal them in the Houshin, located in the middle between the human world and the Sennin world. The scene then switches to Taikobo's past. He was a human boy who lived in a Chu-o village and was the son of the village chief. When he was 12, he witnessed how his entire family was killed and his village destroyed by Dakki. Centuries ago, Dakki descended into the human world, incarnated as a very beautiful woman to deceive the kingdom's leaders by using her power called temptation. At that time, the leader of Kunlun, Genshi Tenson, approached the younger Taikobo and was offered to train him to become a Sennin. Taikobo accepted because he wanted to acquire the power to fight against oppressors like Dakki, so others wouldn't have to suffer like him. Turning to the present, Taikobo also happily accepts the task of his master to seal Dakki and the evil Sennin to protect humanity. Before leaving, Genshi Tenson gave a paupe, the instrument that absorbs the spiritual energy of its owner and from their surroundings to generate power. The paupe given to Taikobo is Dashin Ben, an offensive and defensive type paupe that controls the natural element of wind. The wind element is very flexible and can be used as offense and defense. Not only that, but Genshi Tenson also gave a spiritual beast named Supushan, who would accompany Taikobo during his mission in the human world. The scene then switches and shows Dakki being met by a male Sennin named Shinkohyo, who told her about the Houshin Project that was started and carried out by Genshi Tenson's student named Taikobo. Hearing that, she didn't feel worried and asked Shinkohyo to find out how much power Taikobo had. Arriving in the human world, Taikobo immediately confronted Shinkohyo, who was waiting for him, and realized that Shinkohyo was the first Sennin listed on the Houshin Project to confront him in the human world. Supushan tells Taikobo that Shinkohyo is one of the greatest Sennin, even more powerful than the 3 great Sennin. Supushan asked Shinkohyo why a Sennin as great as himself chose to have an alliance with Dakki. Shinkohyo said he does not side with anyone and prefers to stay outside of the affair to watch it and see how things turn out. Because Taikobo mocked his outfit, Shinkohyo became angry and immediately used his paupe named Rakoben to attack him. However, Taikobo parried the attack, even being able to launch a counterattack that managed to injure Shinkohyo's face, albeit only slightly. Even so, Shinkohyo became even more excited because, in the past 5,000 years, no one had ever managed to injure him. Because of that, he decided to consider Taikobo his rival. Afterward, Taikobo and his spiritual beast headed to the Yin Imperial Palace, where Dakki was, because he thought that if they could defeat her first, the other evil Sennin would be easily defeated, so the mission would be completed quickly. At the palace, Taikobo met a man named Hiko, who then asked him why he had come to the palace. When he finds out that Taikobo intends to defeat Dakki, unexpectedly, he supports Taikobo and is willing to help him. Hiko says that he works as Dakki's servant in the palace, but he is not affected by her temptation at all. Hiko says that he intends to save his sister, Koshi, who is currently held captive by Dakki. However, Taikobo was caught by Dakki because Supushan was hit by the temptation spell, and his paupe was also captured by her. After that, Dakki plans to execute Taikobo and the 100 sacrificed civilians because he came there to fight her. However, the residents did not stay silent and tried to fight back by dropping the soldiers into a large hole filled with venomous snakes. Dakki was angry to see the resistance, then used her temptation to control the Sennin, destroying the residents' foothold so that they all fell into the hole. Amidst the chaos, Hiko manages to save Taikobo and takes him to his house. Taikobo looked shocked by what happened, but Hiko encouraged him and asked him not to give up because Hiko believed that he had the power to defeat Dakki and save humanity. After that, Shinkohyo went to Taikobo to return Supushan and Dashin Ben to him. The next day, Taikobo invites Supushan to start their adventure to find friends and form alliances with people who want to defeat Dakki because he realizes that if he is alone, he cannot defeat her and her troops. At the palace, Hiko welcomes his best friend, Bunchu, who has just arrived after doing a mission. They had been friends for more than 20 years when Bunchu, the Empire's strategist, managed to bring down a spiritual beast that suddenly appeared in the capital. But then, Hiko came and hit Bunchu, saying that the spiritual beast didn't mean any harm and just wanted to find his son. After that incident, the Emperor hired Hiko in the palace, and he became close friends with Bunchu. Turning to the present, Bunchu faced the Emperor and did not hesitate to attack Dakki, who who he had considered an enemy. She could easily ward off the attack, but she didn't counter the attack. Bunchu then asked the emperor who he trusted the most in this world. Due to being under the influence of the temptation spell, the emperor chose Dakki as the person he trusted the most, whereas, in the past, Bunchu was the emperor's right-hand man who was the most loyal to him. Upon hearing that, he was determined to defeat Dakki no matter what. Meanwhile, Taikobo meets a man named Lisei who asks for help because he was attacked by a living human boy Paupe hybrid named Nadaku, who is none other than his own son. After that, Lisei took Taikobo to Shintokan City because he was a commander in charge of protecting the city. Lisei recounted that 10 years ago, his wife, Linshi, was pregnant for more than 3 years and never gave birth until one night. She dreamed of meeting a man who gave her a ball-shaped Paupe. The Paupe miraculously entered Linshi's stomach, and the next day, she finally gave birth to a round lump of flesh. Thinking that the lump was a monster, she slashed it, and Nadaku was finally born. Even though he is not a real human, Linshi considers and treats him as her son. She loves him very much. Knowing the power possessed by Nadaku, Taikobo also intends to make him his ally and tries to befriend him. Suddenly, they were involved in a fierce battle, but this time, Taikobo, who had known Nadaku's weakness, parried his attack and aimed it at his parents. Nadaku, who loved his mother, became careless because he wanted to save his mother. Taikobo then asked him why he hated Lisei so much. He replied that Lisei hated him and never considered him his son. The scene then switches to the past, when Nadaku accidentally made the spiritual beast ruler of a river furious because he used his Paupe in the river and caused all the fish to die. The spiritual beast was about to kill him and his mother as punishment for his actions. However, Nadaku instead killed the spiritual beast to protect his mother. As a result of his actions, the spiritual beasts attacked the city to take revenge on him. Realizing that this was his fault, Nadaku sacrificed himself to protect his mother and all the townspeople. Linshi, who deeply mourned his death, then made such a magnificent tomb for her beloved son. However, Lisei instead destroyed the tomb, thinking that the spiritual beasts would be furious if they built a tomb for Nadaku. On the other hand, Taitsu, the male Sennin who created Nadaku, resurrected Nadaku. Since that, he has had a serious grudge against his father, who was responsible for destroying the grave his mother made for him when he died. Although Nadaku has had many chances to kill his father, he never did. In the end, he admitted defeat to Taikobo. But then, Taitsu arrived and caught Nadaku, and he told Taikobo that he would train Nadaku to become stronger. After that, Taitsu confirmed that Nadaku would become one of the allies that Taikobo could rely on to defeat Dakki. At the same time, the emperor assigns one of Bunchu and Hiko to attack another kingdom led by a prince named Kyobunkan, who is said to be going up against the empire. Bunchu then volunteered to carry out the mission, even though he knew that it was one of Dakki's cunning plans that had influenced the emperor to destroy other kingdoms. Sometime later, Taikobo and Supushan were approached by Dakki, who suddenly confronted them in the middle of the journey. However, Taikobo immediately knew that the person in front of him was not the real Dakki. That person was a male Sennin named Yozen, who could change his form into anyone, even a powerful Sennin like Dakki, even though he could not imitate Sennin's female technique. Yozen reveals to Taikobo that he has been ordered by Genshi Tenson to test his abilities, and if he loses, Yozen will take over the mission of the Houshin Project. Meanwhile, at the palace, the emperor informs Bunchu that Hiko has betrayed them and leaves the palace. Hiko did this because he held a grudge against the emperor, who met his wife, Kashi, and tried to seduce her, even though the emperor was under Dakki's spell at that time. However, because Kashi was loyal to her husband, she decided to end her life to protect her honor. It didn't stop there. Hiko's sister, Koshi, who became Dakki's servant and saw the incident, then decided to follow in her sister-in-law's footsteps to not burden her brother, so that Hiko got her freedom and left the palace as far as possible. Hiko, who knew this, suddenly felt angry and challenged the emperor to a duel with him, even though he realized that it was Dakki's plan to get rid of Kashi, who often rebelled against her. The emperor has a great fighting ability and can take down Hiko, who is much bigger than him. However, the emperor decides to keep him alive and leaves the palace, even though he knows Hiko will head to Seiki City to join the rebel forces fighting against him. Meanwhile, Yozen informs that he will give 3 tests to Taikobo to determine whether he is worthy of continuing the mission of the Houshin Project, and he has passed the first test, where he does not appear to panic when facing Dakki. Long story short, Taikobo finally managed to pass all the tests given by Yozen very well. After knowing his abilities, Yozen realized he was not strong enough to carry out a mission as heavy as the Houshin Project, so he decided to return to the Sennin world and train harder. After that, he also promised Taikobo that he would come back to help him defeat Dakki and her henchmen. Arriving in Seiki, Taikobo chose to stay there and taught the residents to farm. Not long after, he met a boy named Bukichi, who begged to be his student. It happened because Taikobo became very famous in the Senin world after carrying out the mission of the Houshin Project. However, he rejected Bukichi's request because, for now, he just wanted to focus on completing his mission. After that, Taikobo was met by a friendly and kind man named Kisho. Suppushan then remembered Genshi Tenson's words about making Kisho the king who would replace the emperor and formed an alliance with him to defeat Dakki. Kisho, the king of the west, told Taikobo that he had been imprisoned for 7 years for fighting Dakki. In addition to holding a grudge against her for having been imprisoned, he apparently wants to avenge the death of his oldest son, Hakuyuko. Turned out that his son was killed by Dakki just because he was not influenced by her temptation. Kisho then asked Taikobo if he should remain loyal to his emperor after all that had happened. He says that Kisho must destroy the Yin Empire, which is currently controlled by Dakki, and become the new ruler who will bring about world peace. Hearing this, he agreed to help Taikobo defeat Dakki and appointed Taikobo to be a strategist in his army. Meanwhile, in the Senin world, Genshi Tenson seems happy that Hiko has finally left the palace and decides to fight against the Yin Empire, which can increase their fighting power to defeat Dakki. Knowing that Hiko can only rely on his physical strength, which is not enough to protect him from her, Genshi Tenson sends a Senin to protect him. Elsewhere, Hiko and some of his loyal soldiers are confronted by Dakki's men, threatening him by taking his father hostage. At the same time, Taitsu met Taikobo, told him that Hiko was in danger, and asked Taikobo to save him immediately. Not only that, but Taitsu also brought along Naraku and asked him to accompany Taikobo on the rescue mission. The male Senin named Kotenka, who was ordered to protect Hiko, arrived first and immediately confronted Dakki's men. Tenka turns out to be Hiko's second son, who decides to train as a Senin in Kunlun Mountain to gain strength that surpasses his father's. Although Hiko is an ordinary human, he has a strength almost close to Senin. That's why Tenka has ambitions to become stronger and surpass his father. Soon after, a huge tsunami suddenly hit the place and drowned everyone. But then, Bukichi arrived there and immediately saved them. Meanwhile, 4 of Bunshu's men, called the Shisei of the Kuryu Island, are ready to confront Taikobo and Naraku, who are about to save Hiko. Taikobo intends to face the Shisei alone, and one of them, a man named Koyuken, says that he will fulfill Taikobo's wish. Knowing that Koyuken had fought Dakki before, Taikobo invited him to work together instead. However, Koyuken refused because he wanted to obey Bunshu's orders. Even though Bunshu hated Dakki, he remained loyal to the emperor, who ordered him to kill Hiko and Taikobo. While Koyuken is fighting Taikobo, his 2 comrades, Oma and Liko Ha, decide to go to Seiki City and kill Hiko. However, Naraku didn't let them go and then chase after them. Liko Ha then told Oma to leave first while he fought against Naraku. But then, Yozen arrived there and blocked Oma, who was about to head to Seiki City. At the same time, Shinko-hyo tells Bunshu that Oma intends to attack Seiki City, whereas Bunshu only ordered them to kill Hiko. Turning back to Taikobo, he had to face off against Koyuken and one of his comrades Yashin and engage in a fierce battle with them. Oma, who had arrived at Seiki City, split one of the nearby mountains to destroy the city. After that, Oma launched a full attack on Yozen, looking happy when he found out that his attack hit Yozen heavily. But as it turned out, Yozen managed to dodge the attack and transformed into Oma's Paupe, fatally wounding him. Yozen asked him to back off while threatening to kill him. Taikobo, who was about to attack Koyuken, suddenly stopped his attack because he felt an overwhelming aura of fury. Even Oma and Liko Ha returned there, having sensed the aura. Suddenly, Bunshu arrived and immediately attacked them. Bunshu attacks Taikobo first, knowing that he intends to destroy the Yin Empire. Bunshu, who is very loyal to the emperor, can't let that happen because he only wants to defeat Dakki and keep the Yin Empire. However, Taikobo said everyone wants a new leader because they think the current leader has failed to protect them. When Bunshu was about to attack Taikobo, Hiko suddenly came and immediately protected him. Hiko tries to convince Bunshu to join him to defeat Dakki. However, Bunshu refuses and considers him a traitor. Naraku and the others then surrounded Bunshu, preparing to attack him. Even so, they were not a worthy opponent for him and he could easily take them all down. Taikobo, who saw his friends injured like that, then got up and showed his true power that could defeat Bunshu and the Shisei, even making them all choose to run away rather than face him. A few days later, Taikobo, who fainted from exhaustion after fighting Bunshu and his minions, finally woke up and realized that he was already in Seiki City. He was informed that Kisho was suffering from a serious illness, so he visited him. Taikobo meets Kisho's son, Kitan, and tells about his first meeting with Kisho 20 years ago when he kindly allowed refugees from other cities to stay in Seiki City, even though their food supplies would be limited. Kitan then asked Taikobo for help to find the whereabouts of his older brother, Kihatsu, because Hatsu was their father's successor after their older brother was killed by Dakki. Taikobo then rushed off to look for Hatsu and accidentally met a man who said Hatsu was in a tea shop not far from there. However, Bukichi, who had just arrived there, was told that Hatsu was the man who had met Taikobo before. They then brought Hatsu to meet his father, who was lying sick. Kisho then conveyed his will to Hatsu to build a new country of peace and prosperity and ordered Hatsu to listen to all advice from Taikobo because the Sennin could guide Seiki to the right path. After delivering his last message to Hatsu, Kisho finally dies in peace, and Hatsu crowns the new king of the West. In front of all his people, Hatsu made a speech that he would continue his father's struggle to fight the Yin Empire, which had always oppressed them because he was influenced by Dakki. After that, Hatsu officially changed Seiki's name to Shu. On the other hand, Kitan expresses his concern to Taikobo regarding the actions of the Sennin from Kingo, who are Dakki's henchmen. Taikobo then tells Kitan that the Sennin world Sennin will also make a move to defeat Dakki and his henchmen. Afterward, Taikobo returned to his master and asked permission to go to Kingo Island to meet the island's ruler, Suten Kyoshu. At the same time, Bunshu turned out to have arrived at Kingo first and asked the Sennin on Kingo Island to help him fight against the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain. Suten agreed to Bunshu's request and ordered his men to help Bunshu conquer the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain. Otenkun, one of the Sennin from Kingo Island, later told Bunshu that their leader behaved strangely as if they were being controlled after he left the island 20 years ago. Hearing that, he suspected that it was Dakki's doing who planned to control the Sennin on Kingo Island. Bunshu planned to investigate the matter further, but he asked Otenkun to prepare the Sennin who would fight against the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain. When he returned to the palace and asked the emperor about Dakki, he was surprised when the emperor did not know someone named Dakki. Elsewhere, Dakki turns out to be meeting Shinko-hyo and asks him for help dealing with Taikobo and the others under the pretext that he wants to protect the Yin Empire. Meanwhile, Taikobo, who was about to head to Kingo Island, was blocked by Dakki, who turned out to have manipulated Suten Kyoshu's mind to move to Kingo Island to avoid attacks from Taikobo. Shinko-hyo then told Taikobo that Bunshu had already asked for the help of the Sennin from Kingo Island to deal with the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain. Shinko-hyo said that Kingo Island had around 1,000 Sennin, while Kunlun Mountain only had 400 Sennin, which was completely unbalanced. Hearing this, Taikobo then returned to Kunlun Mountain to warn them. Turned out that Taitsu and the others had known about it. They prepared their 12 strongest Sennin to face the Sennin from Kingo Island and appointed Taikobo as their leader in battle. After that, Taikobo asked one of the Sennin named Fugen to find a battle location far from residential areas so that the residents would not become victims. Shortly afterward, they moved Kunlun Mountain to face off against Kingo Island, which launched the attack first. With the help of Yozen and Nanaku, they managed to fend off the attack with ease. However, suddenly, Bunshu launched a large explosive cannon, destroying a part of Kunlun Mountain. Fortunately, Taikobo retaliated by launching a fatal attack to punch a hole in Kingo Island. Unexpectedly, Kingo Island was protected by an impenetrable barrier, so they had to find other ways to break through their defenses. On the other hand, Yozen has apparently managed to infiltrate Kingo Island disguised as one of the Paupe. Not long after, when Yozen tries to find a way to eliminate the barrier, he is instead confronted by one of the Sennin named Chotenkun, who controls the dimensional Paupe named Kosajin, which creates a sand dimension. He can control all the sand in his dimension, and as long as the enemy is in his dimension, they start to dehydrate and crumble into sand, adding to the dimension. Knowing that Yozen is a yokai, just like himself, Chotenkun invites Yozen to join him. However, he refuses and reveals his true form, a yokai, and fights against Chotenkun. After that, Otenkun was visited by Chotenkun, who told him that he had succeeded in killing Yozen. However, Otenkun found out that the one in front of him was Yozen disguised as Chotenkun, which indicated that he had been defeated. Instead of fighting Yozen, Otenkun tells their past that only Genshi Tenson and Suten Kyoshu know. 200 years ago, they held a meeting to discuss Dakki having managed to trick 300 Sennin from Kingo Island into taking her side. Suten says that Dakki's strength may have surpassed the 3 great Sennin, so the only ones who can stop her are Shinko-hyo and Taijo Rokun. However, their Sennin refused to help them defeat Dakki. That's why Suten offered a peace treaty with Kunlun Mountain, and as proof of his sincerity, he even gave up his son, Yozen, to live in Kunlun Mountain. Genshi Tenson welcomed the peace agreement and sent one of his best students, none other than Otenkun. Turned out that Yozen was treated well at Kunlun Mountain. Meanwhile, Otenkun was locked up in a sealed prison. In fact, Suten did that to protect Otenkun, who was a human, because the Sennin yokai on Kingo Island really hated humans. However, Otenkun didn't know that, so he could easily be tricked by Dakki, which gave him the power that turned him into what he is today. After hearing the story, Yozen still insists that he is a Sennin from Kunlun Mountain, and Otenkun instead allows him to press the button that can deactivate the barrier. After that, Otenkun warned Yozen that one day the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain would know his past and might hate him. However, Yozen kept pressing the button to help the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain struggle, who had treated him well. Otenkun then reports to Bunchu that he deliberately let Yozen deactivate the barrier to lure Taikobo to Kingo Island, who wants to save Yozen with his master, Gyokute. However, unbeknownst to them, Hiko and Tenka, along with 3 Sennin who call themselves the Unsho sisters, enter Kingo Island and manage to find the island's core, which is where Bunchu controls all their attacks. The Sennin sisters warn them to be wary of the Jutenkun, the 10 strongest Sennin yokai subordinates to Bunchu led by Otenkun. While searching for Yozen's whereabouts, Gyokute reveals Yozen's past to Taikobo and asks him to return to Kunlun Mountain because Gyokute will save Yozen. However, Taikobo didn't return to Kunlun Mountain and invited his spiritual beast to find the location of the island's core. Meanwhile, Gyokute finally found Yozen, who had been dropped by Otenkun. Using his own blood, Otenkun can emit a red haze of smoke, which encircles Gyokute and Yozen. Knowing that his blood can melt the opponent's body, Gyokute tries to attack him so they can be freed from the room. However, the attack didn't work on Otenkun, who then told him a way out of the room. Gyokute also tried to go to the exit while carrying Yozen's body and protecting his student with his own body. On the other hand, Taikobo, who saw the red room, rushed over to it and saw Gyokute, who stepped out of there in a hurry. Although Gyokute managed to save Yozen, the Sennin eventually died. Before continuing the fight, Taikobo returned to Kunlun Mountain and held a meeting with the Sennin, who were angry with Gyokute's death and planned to use all their strength to avenge his death. However, Taikobo explained that they shouldn't act rashly because Otenkun and the others had quite a formidable strength, which could even easily defeat Yozen and Gyokute. Taikobo then devised a plan to divide them into several teams on Kingo Island, where he would team up with Fugen, who apparently didn't like fighting face-to-face opponents. But then, one of the Sennin named Doko Tenson tells Taikobo that he will include his student, a man named Ego, in his team to help them. After that, Taikobo visited Yozen, who was being treated, where he had been implanted with a small parasite in his body that could suck his life energy until he died. They couldn't get the parasite out of his body because that would cause Yozen to die instantly. The only way to save him is to kill the person who has implanted the parasite in his body, which is none other than Otenkun. Meanwhile, Hiko and Tenka, still on Kingo Island, are surrounded by angry yokai because one of the Unsho sisters is causing a ruckus there. Totenkun, one of the yokai Sennin from the Jutenkun, then traps Hiko and Tenka in a very powerful whirlwind. Thanks to his ingenuity, Tenka defeated Totenkun, and they finally survived. After Totenkun's defeat, Otenkun ordered the remaining Jitenkun to attack the Sennin from Kunlun Mountain and kill them all. 2 days had passed since Taikobo asked the Sennin to scatter in search of the core of Kingo Island, but none of them had found it yet. Taikobo, who felt hungry, then headed to an area filled with very dense fruit trees. A trap from one of the Jitenkun named Intenkun turned the area into a snowy plain covered with ice. Fugen tells Taikobo that he will face Intenkun and asks him to save his strength for a bigger fight. Even though Fugen doesn't like fighting, the male Sennin always tries to negotiate with his opponent, just like he did with Intenkun. However, Intenkun blatantly refused the negotiations and immediately attacked them with the power he had. Fugen, who doesn't move from his place, can easily break Intenkun's attacks just by using his pape, shaped like a globe, which controls the atoms. Fugen turned out to be serious about negotiating and making peace with Intenkun. In fact, he simply handed his pape to his opponent as a form of his sincerity to make peace. But because Intenkun still refuses, Fugen controls his pape to explode Intenkun's place, killing him immediately. Meanwhile, several Sennin who were in Kunlun Mountain suddenly fell ill, so Genshi Tenson had to intervene to investigate by going to where Yozen was being treated. When he got there, Yozen turned out to have disappeared somewhere. Not only in Kunlun Mountain, the Sennin who were on a mission on Kingo Island, including Tenka, apparently experienced the same thing, where they suffered from the same pain and signs as Yozen after he was planted with parasites. Taikobo, who knows this, then asks Bukichi and the Sennin, who are not infected with the parasite, to take those who are sick somewhere so they can be treated simultaneously. At the same time, Taikobo will look for Otenkun's whereabouts, even though he is also infected by the parasite. Not long after, Ego finally arrived there. He was not infected with the parasite because his skin was very sensitive, so he could detect the presence of the parasitic tick and kill it immediately. On the other hand, Hiko and Tenka are finally reunited with the Unsho sisters. They are not infected with parasitic lice because they wear special clothes and possess a medicine that can temporarily withstand the effects of parasitic lice. Meanwhile, Naraku, a Paupe, is not infected with the parasite and decides to look for Otenkun's whereabouts. At the same time, he even smelled the presence of Yozen, who was forcing himself to go to Kingo Island. Not long after, Taikobo asked Igo to follow Naraku because of all the team members, only them who did not contract the parasitic tick. Thanks to the help of radar from Fugen, Igo finally found Naraku, who was with Yozen. However, they fell into the trap of Otenkun's men, who wanted to kill them all at once. Soon afterward, Naraku faces a female Jitenkun named Kinko Seba, who wields the dimensional Paupe named Kinkojin, which can bend or emit light. However, she can easily take down Naraku with her attacks. Meanwhile, Yozen, facing Kinko's partner, Yotenkun, becomes overwhelmed by his unexpected attack, so Igo finally asks Yozen to let him fight Yotenkun alone. Igo, who has a very high level of sensitivity, can easily read Yotenkun's movements without needing to see them. But then, Kinko traps them in another dimension, which causes Yozen and company to have to fight with their own shadows. Yozen also uses his ability to change forms into several Sennin he has faced until finally able to trick Kinko so Naraku can launch a fatal attack that instantly kills Kinko. However, Yozen ran out of energy and collapsed unconscious after the attack until Igo became furious and immediately mobilized his true power to kill Yotenkun. After that, Igo realized that Yozen's body had disappeared somewhere. On the other hand, the Unsho sisters, who have to deal with 3 Jitenkun at once, are forced to make Tenka and Hiko shrink and lock them in an urn because the fight will endanger their lives. Since they have the exact same Paupe as the Jutenkun's Paupe that can create a spatial dimension, they can easily defeat the Jitenkun by making their bodies smaller so Madonna can eat them. The scene then switches and shows Yozen, who awakens in his fully yokai form, and has completely recovered from the effects of the parasitic lice that absorbed his life energy. He was saved by Otenkun, who then brought Yozen to meet his father, Tsuten Kyoshu. Otenkun turned out to bring father and son together because he wanted Yozen to fight against his father. Otenkun then told Yozen that he had teamed up with Dakki to erase Tsuten's memories of him and instigated Bunchu to start a war with the Sennin from the Kunlun Mountains. Otenkun said that he could even order Tsuten, who he had complete control over, to attack his own son. Yozen, who was seriously injured in the attack, told his father 50 years ago that he had come to Kingo Island to ask about his biological father. They met at that time, but he doesn't say he is Yozen's biological father. Hearing that, he ignores Yozen's words and attacks him again on orders from Otenkun, who has controlled his body. However, Yozen didn't just give up and tried to restore his father's memory by saying that he had never denied his true identity as a yokai, even though he was a Sennin from the Kunlun Mountains. Hearing that, Tsuten began to remember his true identity. After that, Tsuten destroys Kingo Island on several sides due to the explosion of his tremendous power. Knowing that he could no longer control Tsuten, Otenkun tried to run away. However, Yozen managed to catch him until a huge explosion finally killed Tsuten. Seeing this, Otenkun also said that it was Yozen who had caused Tsuten to be killed. However, Yozen said that the loser was Otenkun because, until the end of his life, Tsuten had maintained his pride as one of the 3 great Sennin who was highly respected in the Sennin world. At the end of his life, Otenkun still refuses to admit defeat and tells Yozen that Dakki will defeat them all. Shortly afterward, Yozen returned to his Sennin form, met Igo and Naraku, who had been waiting for him, and then took them back to the Kunlun Mountains. When he got there, Yozen was surprised to find out that the Sennin were still infected with parasitic fleas, even though Otenkun had died. He also thought that the parasitic fleas were controlled by Dakki to paralyze their fighting power. Enshi Tenson then called Supushan's parents, who could absorb the parasitic fleas from the Sennin's body, so they finally recovered and returned to normal health. Soon after that, he asked Yozen and the Sennin to go see Taikobo, who had found the location of Bunchu's whereabouts. Taikobo intends to buy time against Bunchu alone until the Sennin arrives there. Knowing this, Fugen then encouraged Taikobo by giving food to him, but as it turned out, the food had been spiked with anesthetic to put him to sleep because Fugen didn't want him to get hurt in the fight, so he replaced Taikobo to fight with Bunchu to buy time. Fugen did that because the Sennin thought Taikobo had to stay alive to defeat Dakki. Not long after, Bunchu finally appeared and destroyed the place. As usual, Fugen also tried negotiating with him and avoided the fight as much as possible. Seeing Fugen, who had been infected with parasitic fleas, Bunchu then let him speak. Fugen said that he had known about Bunchu's devotion to the Yin Empire for more than 300 years and was trying to protect it. However, the current Yin Empire was completely different from the past after Dakki came and took control of the Emperor. Because of this, Fugen suggested that Bunchu accept the rise of a new era with a new leader who would bring about peace and prosperity in their country and throughout the world. However, Bunchu said that saving the Yin Empire was his top priority. He even went as far as to pit the Senins on Kingo Island and the Kunlun Mountains to destroy each other so that the Senins would not interfere with the Yin Empire. Shortly afterward, Fugen reminded Bunchu of Tsuten, who had cared for him with all his heart on Kingo Island. Bunchu argued by asserting that Tsuten wasn't the person he used to be because he had been controlled by Dakki. The Jitenkans had also betrayed Bunchu, so it wouldn't be a problem for him to destroy Kingo Island. Bunchu, who thought they had nothing more to talk about, attacked Fugen. On another place, the Emperor was already preparing to attack Choka City in the human world. This then made the Shisei panic and intended to tell Bunchu, who was on Kingo Island. But then, Dakki appeared and tricked the Emperor into attacking the Shisei until they all died at the hands of the Emperor. Back to the fight, Fugen tried to reply to Bunchu's attack with his Paupe, but the attack didn't scratch his body. When he was about to attack Fugen with his great power, a vortex of wind suddenly protected Fugen, indicating that Taikobo had arrived there and did not fall asleep like Fugen wanted. With his Paupe and with help from Fugen, Taikobo was finally able to launch an attack that could slash Bunchu's face, and at the same time, the Senin from the Kunlun Mountains finally arrived there in full force. Knowing what had happened, Yozen did not hesitate to show his true form, a yokai, and then attack Bunchu and the other Senin. Unfortunately, Bunchu managed to survive the attack because he took cover behind his spiritual beast named Kokukirin, which could even withstand the attacks of the Paupe from the Senin. Bunchu then asked Kokukirin to take him to the mainland because he wanted to face the Senin. He then activated his third eye, which turned out to be able to increase his strength. In fact, he can easily defeat two Senin at once with one attack. Meanwhile, in the human world, Hatsu succeeded in convincing the other three kings from the north, east, and south to form an alliance and face the Emperor of the Yin Empire. Elsewhere, after fighting the Shisei, the Emperor turns out to be exhausted and unconscious until he finally wakes up and is on the streets. He then met a little girl who turned out to have been watching over him while he was unconscious. Since the Emperor's appearance changed, she didn't recognize him. Despite living in poverty and misery, the little girl took the Emperor to her home to treat his wounds. Seeing the state of his people firsthand, the Emperor finally realized that all this time, he had made a mistake that made his people live in misery. When the Emperor was resting, the girl's mom, who apparently recognized her king, tried to kill the Emperor because she felt a grudge against the Yin Empire that had caused her life to suffer as it is today. However, when she tried to stab the Emperor with a knife, the blade broke and did not injure his body. On Kingo Island, Fugen informs the Senin about Taikobo's plan via telepathy, in which they plan to attack Bunchu simultaneously as the stars surrounding Kingo Island fall. However, Fugen, who knew that Bunchu would be able to survive even if they attacked him at once, then stated that he had a plan of his own and told the Senin. Not long after, the stars began to fall, so the Senin simultaneously began to approach Bunchu and launch attacks at him. Yozen, who wanted to go to war with the Senin, was prevented by one of the Senin named Dodoku, who asked him to stay there and survive, and instead left a Paupe to be given to his student, which was none other than Tenka. On the other hand, Taikobo, who wanted to join in attacking Bunchu with the Senin, was prevented by Yozen, who chose to fulfill Dodoku's request that Taikobo not be involved in their battle against Bunchu. Despite being attacked simultaneously, Bunchu managed to fend off their attacks and even launched a counterattack that instantly killed several Senin at once, including Dodoku. However, the Senin did plan to sacrifice themselves, including Fugen, who had secretly sneaked behind Bunchu while he was fighting the Senin. With his Paupe, Fugen blew himself up, hoping that Bunchu would also die in the massive explosion. The explosion destroyed most of Kingo Island and killed the Senin yokai there. Luckily, Yozen managed to survive because of the power of his yokai, while Taikobo was protected by Supushan, who was finally able to change to his true form. Taikobo then told Yozen that he had known the Senin would sacrifice their lives to stop Bunchu and regretted that he could not do anything to prevent that. Yozen replied to Taikobo that the death of the Senin in battle was not his fault, and at least they had succeeded in defeating Bunchu. However, Taikobo tells Yozen that Bunchu isn't dead yet, and is now heading to the Kunlun Mountains to kill Genshi Tensone. Because of that, Taikobo rushed after him and was going to face him. Elsewhere, Hiko and Tenka, who saw the explosion from a distance, were surprised by the appearance of Oten-kun, who was still alive. He then took Hiko away, saying that he would be the most important gift for someone. In the Kunlun Mountains, Genshi Tensone had found out that Bunchu was still alive and was now heading to his place. Because of that, he ordered the Senin to increase their vigilance while facing Bunchu alone. On the way to the Kunlun Mountains, Taikobo then asked Yozen why the Senin still went with him, even though their chances of winning were very small. Yozen replied that since they had fought so far, he would fight alongside Taikobo to the end. Elsewhere, Bunchu seems to have been seriously injured due to the explosion created by Fugen, but all that did not dampen his determination to defeat Genshi Tenson and destroy the Sennin world. Bunchu finally met with Genshi Tenson, who had been waiting for his arrival. He immediately prepared to fight Genshi Tenson, who he considered the mastermind who wanted to destroy the Yin Empire. However, Genshi Tenson said he was not much different from Dakki, who wanted to control the Yin Empire from behind. Since the emperor was very young, Bunchu had educated him to become someone he wanted. Turned out that Bunchu was the one who had been managing the government from behind before Dakki's arrival. He also argued that he did all that for the sake of mankind. However, that was a lie because before Dakki's arrival, the emperor's reign was going very well, and all the people lived in prosperity. The fight finally began, where Genshi Tenson issued his Paopei, Bankohan, which can control the gravity around him, making it difficult for Bunchu to move. Genshi Tenson then added 10 times the strength of his gravity. However, seeing him still able to move, Genshi Tenson added his strength by 100 times, which could even affect Supushan, who was moving towards the Kunlun Mountains. With a burning determination to protect the Yin Empire, Bunchu can still rise, so Genshi Tenson plans to increase his strength by 1,000 times. One female Sennin named Ryukitsu Koshu tries to prevent it because if the war happens, it will endanger her own life. However, Genshi Tenson was not afraid to face Bunchu and increase the strength of gravity by 1,000 times, where Bankohan then created a black hole that sucked in whatever was around him. Unexpectedly, Bunchu could reverse the attack, eventually destroying the Kunlun Mountains and making his gravitational power completely disappear. As a result of the attack, Genshi Tenson was dying and lying helpless. Knowing that Genshi Tenson wasn't dead, Bunchu went to him and attacked him again. But then, Otenkun arrived there and stopped him. Otenkun brought Hiko in front of Bunchu, where Hiko looked very angry because his best friend had apparently killed the Sennin Kunlun Mountains. When they were fighting, Otenkun took the opportunity to approach Genshi Tenson to take revenge on the Great Sennin because he had handed Otenkun to Kingo Island in exchange. Before handing Otenkun to Tsuden to be brought to Kingo Island, Genshi Tenson apparently split Otenkun's soul in two, so he survived the fight against Yozen. Otenkun then met Taikobo and Yozen while handing Tenka to them and said that he wanted the three of them to witness the fight between Hiko and Bunchu in the spatial dimension he had prepared. Hiko, who was very angry with Bunchu, said that his best friend would not kill someone weaker than him. However, Bunchu insisted that he would not be influenced by past stories, as he had decided to fight to the last drop of blood to protect the Yin Empire. Not long after, Otenkun's voice was heard telling the two to hurry up to fight, revealing Tenka and the others watching them. Tenka then reminded his father that Bunchu was very dangerous and asked his father to be careful. However, Hiko instead gave his sword to his son and fought Bunchu with his bare hands, saying that he would finish Bunchu because his best friend was gone. On the other hand, Taikobo then asks Yozen to turn into Otenkun to free Hiko and Bunchu from Otenkun's spatial dimension that can melt the opponent's body. However, Yozen said that Otenkun himself became the space, so he couldn't destroy the space other than by killing Otenkun. Hiko and Bunchu then engage in a fierce battle, even though Hiko is not a commensurate opponent for Bunchu, who fights using Paopei. Meanwhile, Tenka, who did not know that the elite Sennin had died, then urged Taikobo and Yozen to do something to save his father. Yozen said that only Taitsu and Doko were confirmed not to have died from the fatal attack. However, their whereabouts were unknown at this time, and it was certain that they were seriously injured and unreliable. Yozen then gave Dodoku's Paopei to Tenka, who looked so sad and devastated when he found out that his master had died. Meanwhile, Bunchu said that he didn't want to fight with Hiko anymore because, at the same time, their bodies started to weaken because of Otenkun's Paopei. However, Hiko still didn't care and continued attacking Bunchu, forcing him to attack Hiko with his weapon. Unexpectedly, Hiko could fend off his attack, finally landing a punch on his face and destroying the mask. Since Hiko was an ordinary human, he could not withstand the attacks from Otenkun's Paopei, which weakened his body. Even so, Hiko still tried to wake Bunchu by saying that the Yin Empire they had been proud of had gone long ago. However, the stubborn Bunchu said he didn't want to hear those words from a traitor like Hiko. However, he ended up dying in front of Bunchu. Despite calling Hiko a traitor, Bunchu was devastated by Hiko's death and ignored Kokukirin, who asked him to leave immediately. Otenkun then appeared in front of Bunchu, saying that his history was over. However, Bunchu, who was still mourning the death of his best friend, suddenly felt angry and then launched an attack on Otenkun, which destroyed the dimension of space and killed him, who died this time. Kokukirin rushed to take the seriously injured Bunchu away from the Kunlun Mountains. Seeing Bunchu running away, Taikobo rushed after him with Supushan, asking Yozen and Tenka to stay there and help the others. On the other hand, Kokukirin, who had also been seriously injured, could no longer hold on and died. Not long after, Taikobo, who managed to catch up to them, challenged Bunchu to fight against him and finish all of this. They got into a fierce battle, where Bunchu, who was seriously injured, could still outperform Taikobo, who didn't have enough experience in fighting. But then, he managed to get up and attacked Bunchu with full force. Knowing that Bunchu had been injured so badly, Taikobo threw his Paopei away and fought against Bunchu with his bare hands until Bunchu could no longer continue the fight and finally admitted to being defeated by him. Bunchu reveals that Hiko has awakened himself and says that what he wants to protect is not the Yin Empire, but Bunchu just wants to return the Yin Empire to how it used to be before Dakki's arrival, when they were still close friends. Hearing that, Bunchu decided to end his own life. A few days later, the news of Taikobo's victory finally reached Hatsu, who was on his way to attack the Yin imperial capital. However, unbeknownst to them, the emperor had died and had become very old while sitting on his throne because the effects of the power given by Dakki had vanished. At the same time, Bunchu's soul appeared and met the emperor to bid farewell, until finally, he left there and reunited with his best friend, Hiko, in the afterlife. Elsewhere, the surviving Senins decided to leave the Kunlun Mountains and look for a new place to live. Likewise, the yokai Senin was rescued by the Unsho sisters. A few days later, Supushan and Bukichi still couldn't find Taikobo's whereabouts after he defeated Bunchu, though they were apprehensive about him. In the meantime, Taikobo turns out to be meeting Shinkohyo, who tells him that Dakki has admitted defeat since the Yin Empire collapsed and power was taken over by the Shu dynasty. Dakki then chose to unite herself with planet Earth and turn into spring. The anime ends by showing Taikobo, who decides to continue the mission of the Houshin Project because the evil Senin, the henchmen of Dakki, are still roaming this Earth, so he must find and seal them.